very special guest, Mary Lomando, who is a Jungian astrologer and Egyptologist. She has over 20 years' experience in psychology, metaphysics, and world mythologies. As an archaeoastrologer, her areas of expertise are ancient Egypt and Peru. When you get a reading with Mary, she will help clarify your soul's purpose by focusing on karmic relationship patterns, past life experiences, and talents, future potential, and which is also inherent in the birth chart, combining both astrological vision and intuitive guidance. She's able to facilitate and guide your personal transformation. Mary has lived and worked in Egypt, where she received her degree in Egyptology. She currently leads trips to Egypt and Peru and is researching the archaeological and astronomical connections between these two civilizations. She began Paka Terra Travel as a way to share her love of sacred site travel and Mother Earth with like-minded individuals. You can find out more about Larry Lomando at www.Pacaterra, PACHATERRA.com. Hi, Mary. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Brenda. Well, it's nice to be here tonight. That is quite a mouthful that you to get through there, but thank you very much for that wonderful introduction.
Well, I know you're a friend of Steve's, and he's spoken so highly of you, and Egypt is a love of mine, too, and I'm sure we're going to have a great interview because we're going to talk about stuff that we really, that's at the heart of our spiritual journey, I'm sure.
Yes, it is, and I think we have quite a lot of mutual friends with us tonight, both in and out of spirit, let's put it that way.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Sharing my love of Egypt has pretty much been my life's work, so I'm glad to be here.
So when did you first get interested in Egypt? I mean, like what sparked your interest?
Well, it's kind of a roundabout, like life just kind of intervenes. It wasn't as if I always wanted to be an Egyptologist or, I had kind of like an Indiana Jones thing from when I was young, because I didn't. I basically came to Egypt as a person who was doing research and working on a documentary about Egypt. And that, it kind of came about in very serendipitous ways. But once I was actually in Egypt, my first, few minutes, I knew that just the air, something about it. This was back in 1989. And since then, it was like a conversion experience. And my particular place where all of this came about, like St. Paul on the road to Tarsus, was in front of the Great Sphinx. And to me, that was kind of like a soul repository, if you will, of all of my connections to Egypt, which was interesting because I didn't realize any of that until I was on site in Egypt as an adult. And I was already in my late 30s before I got the call that was something that I really needed to explore more of and incorporate into my life. And since then, I went back and forth on actually living there and studying there between 1989 and 1991. In 1991, I made the major move to, stay in Egypt full time, and I was there until pretty much 1994, where I went to school. I got a degree in Egyptology there. I was lucky enough to be working with some of the best archaeologists in the field, Egyptian and foreign archaeologists.
That is so fabulous. And did you? Which school did you go to? Were you part of the Chicago House, or what school were you part of?
I went to the American University in Cairo, and that's where I got my degree in Egyptology. But previous to that, I had been to NYU and Temple University in Philadelphia. So I came to Egypt as an adult. I was in my late 30s when I actually decided that I was going to go to school in Egypt. I'd been working in New York and studying, and I was interested in art history. I was always interested in ancient history. It wasn't particularly Egyptology, though, until I made that first trip to Egypt, and then that's what sparked it all.
And it's so interesting because, reading up a little bit about you and where you've come as an Egyptologist, and maybe we can talk a little bit about the two schools of thoughts among Egyptologists. And We had John Anthony West as a guest, and I'm sure you've met him. He's great, and he talks about some of the really straight line archaeologists. He calls them the quackademics, where it looks like you have more of a spiritual bent and more of an interest in the actual spiritual development of the Egyptian civilization.
Well, yes, and John Anthony West he's actually one of the grandfathers of, what we call maverick Egyptology, because John's one of the first people that I ever went to Egypt with, and because he was so schooled in so many different disciplines, he brings a lot to the table, and he's pretty no-nonsense when it comes to Egyptology, and, if anyone ever needs to read anything about traveling to Egypt, I recommend John's books, because he really brought it to the table when people really weren't thinking in terms of Egypt except as, well, they're kind of like dusty old archaeology books, and you can kind of dig around in the sand, but bringing some of this, especially bringing the idea of the Sphinx as being much, much older than Orthodox Egyptologists say that it is, all of that. I think John spearheaded the movement for that in the early 1990s, and he's, to me, one of the most respected names in Egyptology right now. And then the 90s there was a huge renaissance in Egypt, and I was lucky enough to be there because I was studying, and I also, as a working adult in the United States, I had been able to go over to Egypt and do things that, let's say a student of 18 or 19 wouldn't be able to do. So having lived in New York, Cairo was not daunting to me in the least. I mean, I was a New Yorker, and I was able to meet people that were pretty high up in the echelons of archaeology, and also in terms of the Egyptian hierarchical structure anyway. So I was able to be there as people were coming over to write their books, to lead tours, to kind of spearhead this movement of looking at Egypt from a different perspective. I mean, John calls it the symbolist theory, which is excellent because that's what Egypt is. It's one big symbol. I mean, there's just
it is. It is. Everything points to all the symbolism everywhere you look.
And we're looking at converging timelines as well. I mean, when we think about it, at least 5,000 years of recorded history, plus the history that the ancient Egyptian priests themselves tell us go back at least 40,000 years. I mean, we're looking at something that it's kind of in and out of time at the same, the Egyptians were incredible, because what we're looking at today, when we look at modern day 2013 Egypt, to do them no disservice whatsoever, we're not perceiving Egypt the way the Egyptians from ancient days looked at it, because they had a different way of seeing things. It was like a holographic vision. Everything was symbolic. Everything was connected. We dissect things and we put them into little boxes and partitions, and that's part of the Western mind, and that's something that we've inherited from the Greeks and the Romans that were the end of Egyptian civilization. I mean, when we talk about where did the Egyptians get this information, where did they get this cosmology from, where did their sacred science come from, that's the big question mark, because it doesn't exist anymore. We're going back and we're kind of looking for it, that underground stream that had to do with archaeology, astronomy, medicine, magic, all of the things that we define and put into categories. They looked at it as one whole. There weren't separate compartments to it, and that's kind of what we're trying to get to when we talk about quantum physics today. But they grok that immediately. They rise to the occasion way back there at Dynasty 1. So that kind of leaves me anyway with my head scratching, like what the heck was all of that about? When I went over there in Egypt the very first time, that was what just stood out. It's like, where is that Egypt? Why don't we see it anymore? Why is there nothing except, yes, there's temples and there's hieroglyphs and there's things in museums that we could go look at, but what happened to those people? It wasn't like the Mayans where they just kind of disappeared. This is like a civilization that was around for 5,000 years. What is it? What's the legacy? And why is it important to even know about it today? That's kind of what got me started about being in Egypt and leaving everything that I knew in New York to go sit myself in Cairo and learn all about it.
Well, it's so interesting, and I'm listening to this, and we briefly touched on the whole sacred science of Egypt, and I love it when you said about magic, because magic has gotten so many negative, connotations, here in the modern world, and, magic is evil, this and that, although ancient Egypt was a magical society. It was a society in which the interconnection between everything, the nature, the universe, and the stars were all part of, what they did in their everyday life. It was a holistic view, which we don't have now. We're living on bits and pieces pretty much. And I was part of that whole 90s thing. We probably danced around each other with our own individual tours that we did in the 90s because I was leading some groups in the 90s too. And there is a real push for that. And I noticed that there's so many spiritual groups going over there now. And, it's just like you said, you go in there, you can feel the energies of those temples, but everything around it is the energy is completely the opposite. And that makes me segue into this whole thing with on the sacred sites of Egypt. And I wanted to talk and get your take on what you felt about some of these. There's a specific temple that I was curious to see what you feel is there, and that's the necropolis of Saqqara.
Yes, well, Saqqara is an extremely massive site, first of all, and it was the site of what they call the original stepped pyramid. And so if you look at it from the eyes of Orthodox Egyptology, that the stepped pyramid, the 7 steps of Saqqara, was the first pyramid, not the Great Pyramids of Giza. Now, I believe, as do a few other people, that Saqqara was part of a healing complex, if you will. It was actually the first capital of Egypt, and we know that, of ancient Egypt. But in terms of, if we're looking at this Egypt that predates the history that we know of, and Edgar Cayce talked about, call it the A word, that there was an Atlantean influx of individuals, if you will, that came into Egypt. And one of those places that was one of the original center points for that influx would have been the area of Saqqara. And the great wise man, magician, high priest, many, many titles of the seer that we know of as Imhotep probably was in that area of Saqqara. Now, Saqqara, as an important site in Egypt itself, started at the beginning of the dynasties, right there at Dynasty 3, and continues all the way through the Greek and Roman period, and ends with the Romans themselves. So there's thousands and thousands and thousands of years of burials right there in Saqqara, which we can, as an archaeologist or an Egyptologist, go in there, even as a tourist, go around and putter around and look at things, and they're kind of layered. That, to me, is kind of like a key of understanding Egypt. It's one of the codes that you kind of get to learn about Egypt, is that nothing in Egypt just meets you straight on, linear fashion. Everything is layered. It's multidimensional. It's multi-textured. And when you start to look at things from that kind of lens of kaleidoscopic view, if you will, Egypt starts to turn and move, and you don't just see the Egypt that's, kind of chaotic, modern, the overview of the Egypt that we have today. You turn that lens a bit, and Egypt moves. It moves into this kind of parallel reality where you walk and you see, and sometimes it's even visual, like a shimmery kind of perception around the corner of your eyes, where you can see and feel and hear and smell the texture of that ancient Egyptian vibration that goes way, way back, way into what we might even call a pre-Atlantean period in Egypt. And it's all about frequency. It's all about holding energy. Some people call it magic. There's many, many words for it. However, it's a vibration, and Egypt it's the alpha and the omega. There's no other vibration like it on this planet. That's why it's been here so long, and why it will continue to hold that vibration. And the Sphinx is a marker point. It's kind of like a turnstile at Grand Central Station. It's where the dimensions merge. And there's parts and points up on that Giza Plateau where you stand in one area and you're transported. It's as if there's an elevator that takes you in and out of parallels. You can feel like you're in India, you could feel like you're in Peru, you could feel like you're in South America, you could feel like you're off planet somewhere, but there's something about the physicality of Egypt itself. It's able to hold that because it was laid down as this grid. Whatever was built on the earth matched a component in the sky. So we get that alchemical saying of as above, so below. It's like the Egyptians, with their sacred geometry and their great skill at architecture, they were able to infuse this into Egypt. It's like this, we call it magic, but it is this incredible vibration of connecting the stars with the earth. And they were extremely adept at knowing how to secure that connection.
And, that is an otherworldly thing, too. Now, kind of going back towards Atlantis, and to kind of, you talked a little bit of travelers coming, strangers from the West or settlers from the West, people who came from Atlantis into Egypt. And there has been lots of theories that Tahuti, as well as Isis and Osiris, who many believe were real people at one time, came from Atlantis. What is your theory on that?
Yes, I do believe that the mythology of Isis and Osiris and that original family, if you will, of Egyptian progenitors were real people. I think the mythology has been cloaked around them and the stories have been handed down, but originally that they came in and there was an Egypt that already existed. And so what we're talking about is a pre-Atlantean Egypt, and we're talking about people who didn't come in as invaders, and it wasn't like a chauvinistic, oh, we know more than you do, ha ha ha, that kind of thing. If we think of, let's say, someone from, let's say, modern-day New York City decides that they're going to move to London, and they bring all their belongings with them, they bring their people with them, they bring their, books and everything that they kind of enjoy, and they come into London. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to throw out, whatever anyone else is doing in London to live there. It seems to me that that Egypt was, in other words, if we're looking at this as a way for mergings to happen, the Egyptians themselves talk about their civilization being around for 40,000 years at least before recorded part of their history gets shown up in what we call history, that something was going on in Egypt. All those priests in Heliopolis and all those priests in Luxor and all those priests all over Egypt didn't make this up. It was handed down to them in different traditions. So if we're looking at, we don't necessarily have to look to the sky and say that the aliens came from outer space. We can just say that there may have been civilizations that moved into Egypt more than once. It was kind of like a flow, an ebb and flow, going back thousands and thousands of years. Now, what happened? We don't know. Some of these, we raise more questions than we have answers, obviously. But, people have written about this. Definitely Edgar Cayce goes into it way back when. But people like Graham Hancock, Robert Bauval, John Anthony West, there are, if we start to look between the nooks and crannies and what they say is Egyptology and archaeology, we find a story, we find a mythology. And where we look at that, we start to piece it together, and it doesn't necessarily have to be channeled. This is why I went there and studied for 4 years, because if we look at the Egyptian writings themselves, they tell us where their history began, and they tell us all about it. But the 18th century archaeologists from Europe, oh, that has to be, that's crazy. That's just crazy talk. That can't be real because it didn't fit their
It didn't fit
European,
the parameters of the belief system, I'm sure.
Exactly. It couldn't be that. It had, God created the world in 7 days, and therefore, this couldn't exist. So if we start, and they were looking at all these fantastic reliefs and tomb paintings and all of the amazing art in Egypt, and they said, oh, well, this is just, it's like Disney World here. This is just one big fairy tale. These people were childish. Look at this visionary, hallucinatory stuff that they believed in. This can't possibly be real. Well, if we look far back into it, we see that what they're actually talking about is quantum physics, and how they explain it is it's revolutionary in its genius because they found ways to explain things that we're just able to grok now. It's mind-blowing.
Well, and because of all this, they were truly an advanced civilization. Their knowledge came from probably a place of, it might have been otherworldly, and there's a lot of theories on that. But what do you attribute in your studies that was to, what was the fall of this Egyptian civilization? I mean, did it start with the priesthood because, or did it start when the Greeks came in? Because they brought a lot of different types of philosophies that kind of crushed a lot of this kind of holistic view of the ancient Egyptians. What is your thought on this?
Well, Egypt was around, like I said, for at least 4,000 to 5,000 years of recorded history, and it had its peaks and its valleys. I mean, it starts out very high in the first dynasties. The pyramid builders are in the fifth dynasty. We have a whole cosmology that's built around architecture, science, medicine, astronomy, physics, all of that good stuff. Then it goes into a decline. After a couple hundred years, things just went downhill. It builds up again, and we have the Middle Kingdom. Down in Luxor, they start building temples. They start bringing back the old religion. It resurges. And again, invaders come in. It goes down again. Then it comes up again in the 18th dynasty. Most people know the pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. They know Tutankhamun, they know Akhenaten, Hatshepsut, Moses III, Ramses in the 19th dynasty. That's the high point of Egypt. That's the Renaissance of Egypt, if you will. Now, it goes through more decline. More invaders come in. Invaders after invaders after invaders come in and yoke Egypt. However, the Egyptian spirit, if you will, and this idea that they are the ones who are responsible for keeping order in the world, their religion always has that as its basis. It's like as above, so below. The cornerstone of Egypt doesn't ever change, even though the rulers come and go up and down. The very end of Egypt, there were black rulers. There were pharaohs from Nubia that sent their daughters up to rule from Luxor. I mean, that's the 25, 26 dynasties. We end with the Greeks coming in, with Alexander the Great, who never actually lived in Egypt, but he founded the city of Alexandria. He was a Macedonian Greek. Then they started to rule from up in Alexandria. The final end of the Egyptian history as we know it is Dynasty 36 with Cleopatra. She is the final pharaoh of Egypt, is Cleopatra. And she's Greek. Her family is from the dynasty of Ptolemy, who was one of the generals of Alexander the Great. He inherited Alexandria when Alexander died, coming home from India, and that's how Cleopatra's family starts to rule Egypt. By the time Cleopatra dies, and we know the story of Julius Caesar and Mark Antony and all of that, she's the end of Egypt. So anyone who loves Cleopatra and, has read her biographies or watched her, the movies about her life, you're watching the end of Egyptian civilization. And then what happens is the Christians come in, the Romans come in, and it's the new age. The age of Pisces is beginning, and the age of Aries goes down with Egypt. That's basically
that was a sad time. That was a sad time, I believe. And what about Nectanebo? I mean, he was the last native pharaoh, wasn't he? And a magician. He was also a magician.
Well, this is what we're talking about, the Greco-Roman influence, where the high magic gets kind of diluted. The original, when we use the word magic, let's talk about a command of maybe quantum physics, which a normal person wouldn't really understand. But, they had priests, they had shamans, they had, there was various degrees of the Egyptian religion, just the way today there would be an inner circle of, let's call it any mystical society, and an outer circle. Not everyone was privy to the way things worked. Nectanebo was an interesting person, but he was studying books that were written 3,000 years before he was born. And so the knowledgeable Greeks that came in, who were schooled by philosophers, learned from the feet of Egyptians thousands of years before, and this information was passed down in the underground stream. I mean, all of this, what goes around comes around. And every person who studies any kind of magical or occult discipline today, it's like it all comes from Egypt. If you study Western magic, every single thing you know comes from Egypt. Now, I'm not talking about India's philosophy or the Far Eastern, but if you study Western magic, it all comes from Egypt.
Well, it's interesting, too, and Egypt has a way of making itself known in every age that we live in. I mean, look what's going on now over there, which, hopefully, I mean, it can be a blessing and a curse on the temples. What do you believe? Do you believe that the current government is going to make it harder to be able to visit these sites, or that they might even actually tear down some of these sites because of the Islamic belief system?
Well, I just came back. I was there until December 14th when I came back, and I'm going again in March. I'll be leaving March 1st. The thing with Egypt, like I said, it's got its peaks and valleys. I was there for the Egyptian Revolution. I was there in Egypt the whole time, from the beginning to the end. And the thing about it is, like, I'm also an astrologer, and the tides of change were coming. January the 11th, Egypt was in that Arab Spring soup of revolution that was going on with these Saturn-Uranus transits. And those transits are around, by the way, until 2015. So we haven't seen the end of, ferment in the Middle East by a long shot. Egypt, as I said, it's like this parallel, in and out of dimensional time. It's like the government that's there is a blip on the screen right now. And then, again, I'm doing no disservice to the Egyptians that are living there, because most of my friends are Egyptians. But none of them voted in an Islamic government. So there was a void that was created, and this government got in. Will they stay in power? No, I don't think so. I think the tide of change is too strong to have a repressive society. The age of Aquarius, we just talked about the age of Aries moving into the age of Pisces. We're leaving the age of Pisces, moving into the age of Aquarius. Aquarius is freedom. Repression will not be allowed to stay, especially in Egypt. Egypt leads the way.
I like that. From your lips to the goddess's ears, let me tell you that.
Well, and it's all about taking the feminine energy. And again, remember when I talked about Egypt? Egypt is very much in the eye of the beholder. The eye of Egypt was the symbol everywhere. It's that systematic integration of the left eye, the right eye, the pineal, the pituitary, left brain, right brain. It's all about merging and seeing things in a new light. Now, in Egypt, as in the rest of the planet, we're moving towards bringing in balance to the masculine hierarchical structures and bringing in more feminine energy. Where better but the Middle East to have that come up, and just rear its head, because that's where the most work needs to be done. That's where the shadow goes in the deepest. Egypt is always and always will be about the goddess. So this is very. It's not to diminish what's going on over there, because politics is a big issue if you're in the middle of the swirl. The idea is that it's all about balance, and sometimes things have to swing 180 degrees to one side before they can get balanced from the 180 degrees to the opposite side. So what we're looking at is things coming into a balance in Egypt, the weighing of the scales, the heart with the white feather of Ma'at. It will come into balance because the Aquarian age says that it must. There's no way for it not to happen. However, when we're looking at I said these transits will be around till 2015. We're looking at about maybe 4 or 5 years of uncertainty. The antiquities in Egypt, this could be a whole other show. The antiquities in Egypt are too important for Egypt for anyone to destroy them or try to keep them down. I mean, all those rumors, it's just crazy. They just opened the third pyramid while I was there in December. Instead of just having 2 pyramids open for people to go into, their government opened a third. So it's kind of even the opposite. They want tourists to come back into Egypt, and they're bending over backwards to open sites that were never opened. I just went into the Serapeum in December, and that's been closed since 1989. So,
the Serapeum is amazing. I've been in there.
Yes.
The serapeum is, now that is something that they can't explain how those sarcophagus got in there. I mean, I can't believe they were rolled on logs and with milk or whatever they said to get those in there. There had to be some other way to get those giant sarcophagus in there. Don't you agree?
Yes, and that's just the tip of the iceberg of how did the Egyptians do it? I mean, there is so much about Egypt that we can't explain. And again, when we think about how they were dealing with principles and physics and laws of nature, that they had a way of working with that perhaps we've lost. I live in southern Florida, and the Coral Castle again is one of those anomalies where, this little 5-foot, European man built this amazing stone structure that looks pretty much like the Giza Plateau in southern Florida. You say, well, how did they do that? We know that there are principles and there are laws of physics that can be manipulated. That's all magic is. It's manipulating the laws of matter. If you can figure out, or someone can tell you how to do that, then, you win the $50 million question. The idea is that the Egyptians were using a system, if you will, that was kind of, I believe, they inherited, or I don't know if they actually made it up, but it feels like however they were able to do these things, it was a system that they inherited, and we've lost the codes to how to do that. And that's where the mystery is. It's going back there and kind of sussing all of that out. I go to Peru all the time as well, and there's things in Peru that I'm standing in Peru and I feel like I'm looking at Egypt because they are exactly similar. It's as if the same building company went over there, but instead of putting it in the middle of the desert, they put it on the highest mountain of Machu Picchu. I mean, it's
well, let's hold that thought for a minute. We got to break for 1 minute commercial, and I hate to. We're on a roll here, but we'll be right back, okay?
Thank you.
A new era in psychic services has begun. PsychicAccess.com. You can connect with our psychic advisors by telephone or chat 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. All of our psychic advisors are interviewed, fully verified, and accuracy tested, assuring you quality service. We're living in some very troubled times right now. More and more, the world's problems are affecting us on a personal level. You don't have to deal with this alone. Our highly accurate psychics, caring advisors, and talented mediums can help with situations you are currently experiencing and can let you know what the future may hold for you. All new customers get a free 6-minute reading. All you have to do is register. Why not visit us now and get a free reading at PsychicAccess.com.
1.
Okay, we're back with Mary Lomando. Boy, this is like dark chocolate to me. Just a wonderful treat. And we had left off, we were talking about the comparison between the temples and the monuments of Peru with ancient Egypt. And this is just fascinating. Can you elaborate on that, Mary?
Well, in brief, to go back and when we were talking about Edgar Cayce, one of the things that struck me, again, I never thought I was going to go to Peru or have anything to do with Peru, but in 1994, a friend of mine convinced me to leave Egypt for a while and go to Machu Picchu, and I did, and I kind of had a similar experience in Peru. When I got there, I thought, wait a minute, this stuff doesn't make sense. And there are so many similarities in the architecture of the Incas. The Incas themselves called themselves sons of the sun, the same way that the ancient Egyptians did and the same way that the Atlanteans did. They built sun temples the same way that the Egyptians did, and they have very similar burial practices, the way they lay out their cities and also the way that the Inca ruled, pretty much the same kind of God on earth type thing as the pharaoh. I mean, their cosmology is very, very similar. The Incas themselves come into play in the 1500s. They actually come very late on the scene in South America and Peru. We're talking about Egypt 4,000 years ago. So where do those timelines connect? I mean, how is it even possible that these Peruvians, these Inca tribes, had the same ideas as the ancient Egyptians. So if we look at that and we go back to that idea of perhaps there was an influx of people coming from different lands as those lands broke up in these pre-Diluvian civilizations, some of that starts to make sense. And, mine's much more brilliant than mine have, kind of pieced this all together over the years. And one of the people that I first read that made perfect sense to me on this was Graham Hancock, who was a brilliant English researcher, and he's still around. He still does tons of good stuff. But he was also talking, and his book is called Fingerprints of the Gods, where he goes into a lot of detail. I wasn't familiar with that book when I went to Peru. All I thought was my eyes are seeing this, and my brain saying, this can't exist. And the Sun Temple in Cusco, Peru, which is called Gate of the Sun, total beautiful enclosure in their main city, is built on the same idea with sacred geometry, the same axial proponents, if you will, as the Great Pyramid in Giza. I mean, it just makes no sense. They had no connections to each other. But why do they come up with the same information? Well, you could say it's a good idea. It's like reinventing the wheel. So somebody came up with it in 5000 BC, somebody comes up with it in 1400. I don't buy that because it's just too unusual. And so, again, we raise more questions than we actually have answers for. But the cosmology of the Incas, they talk about the Milky Way. They talk about the idea of their as above, so below grid of their temples matching the stars in the sky. They have different stars because they're south of the equator, but the idea is still the same. It's as if there was this original race of wise builder people that kind of went around and just populated the planet on these particular acupuncture point lines for what the new grid of a planet post-flood was supposed to look like. And I've been up at Tiwanaku, which is amazing because Tiwanaku looks like the Giza Plateau, but it's on Lake Titicaca, which is the highest lake in the world, 15,000 feet above sea level. It shouldn't be there. So it's like you walk around and again you just kind of scratch your head and say, wait a minute, However, these things do exist. They're on our planet, and luckily enough, we can actually buy airplane tickets and go see them. I don't believe anyone is going to be able to stop us going to sacred sites. I don't believe the energy at sacred sites can be co-opted as long as there is an Earth, and Earth will have a aura and a body of energy around. These sites are part of us, we're part of them, and we're all part of the sky, if you will, and we are connecting the dots. As we get more and more into the idea of the age of Aquarius, which is, we've gone past the marker point of 2012, and now we're moving into the, 2020s, if you will. Once we get closer to some of these intersections of time and space, grid coordinates, if we're looking at them on a diagram, we're going to see that these sacred sites are going to make much more sense because we're going to start to actually understand them. It's like they've been this library waiting for us to get the library cards and start reading the codes. We're finally evolving to the point where we can understand what they mean. That's why they've been here for so long. And I don't think they're going to go anywhere too quick, and I don't think anyone is capable of closing them down. They're not to be closed.
Well, in talking about the similarities with all these sacred sites and actually all over the world, even this in Stonehenge and their whole, their particular myth of creation is very similar to the ancient Egyptians' myth of creation, as well as being a solar-based belief system, and all these similarities. And then there's all this stuff that everybody's talking about it on TV now about the ancient alien things, and that they have this connection with the stars and those advanced civilizations from the stars. Do you believe that that contact with advanced civilizations from other solar systems is part of this whole interconnection all over the world?
Yes, I do. I mean, I believe that initiates from time immemorial, evolved souls, if you will, put on this planet have always been in contact with beings, higher intelligences. If those beings necessarily have to visit in hardware in ships, well, then so be it. I've never seen one, although I can attest to the fact that many people have. I believe that people have always had the capacity to channel. That's what separates us from animals. And I believe that on a spiritual quest, the whole idea is to discover the Godhead inside yourself. Therefore, I believe humans are part starseed, part DNA from other areas, if you will, interstellar DNA, whatever we want to call it. We're here, and we always have had contact. We've never lost certain contact. Do I believe, as some people do, that aliens actually came down to build these things? I don't know if they necessarily had to do that. I think as long as
they may not have to. If your theory is correct, and it's a DNA type of thing that we possess within us, then it could be a multidimensional thing.
Well, and there's always been people who have been able to channel information. Let's say, in Edfu, the Edfu texts talk about the Temple of Edfu in Egypt. They talk about how there were, and this is supposedly books that were written by the Thoth himself, the god Thoth himself.
Tahuti.
Dictated, yes, Tahuti. 9 sages, 9 books, 9 sages. And each one of these sages had a particular discipline that he was master of, whether it was astronomy or medicine or magic or you name it. There was supposedly 9 books there. And they contained the information and the knowledge and the wisdom of everything on Earth, everything that we were ever supposed to know. Well, interestingly enough, it got wiped out. We don't know what happened to those scrolls. They don't exist anymore, blah, blah, blah. However, the idea was that from the Egyptian time immemorial, they believed that there was knowledge, a body of knowledge, information knowledge that was given to them whole. It wasn't in little pieces. It was given to them whole. And it was given by these 9 sages. Well, who were the 9 sages? Were they 9 beings from interplanetary travel? Who knows? They could have been. Were they 9 wise men who came from Atlantis? Well, we don't really know. We just know that the Egyptians tell us that there was a body of knowledge that they know goes back to the beginning of the followers of Horus, who were around 40,000 years ago. And in Egypt, before the followers of Horus existed 40,000 years ago, prior to Heliopolis, that's when the gods walked on Earth. And they believed that there were men, gods, God-men, or whatever you want to call them. And so it does give us pause to ponder. This is what the ancient Egyptian priests handed down and told the Greeks thousands of years later, and the Greeks believed it. They went back to Greece and told everybody, hey, this stuff is, you should see what's going on in Egypt. You all got to come over and go study in these secret societies over there in Egypt. Go find yourself a mystery school. It was like a big fad in Greece to go over and study in Egypt. And you get
that is so fascinating. I'm glad you brought up the followers of Horus, because on the previous shows we've never really delved into that whole theory of the followers of Horus and the different aspects and names of the god Horus too, and all of that must be all interconnected. It's all pre-dynastic, isn't it?
Yes, it is. And when you look at the gods themselves, now, yes, I do believe that Isis and Osiris were real people and that they did have a son who became the first pharaoh of Egypt. When we're looking at some of these other gods, I believe what we're looking at are aspects. We're looking at archetypes, if you will, because the Egyptians had they had an overlay of religion. It wasn't just one religion. They had a stellar religion, they had a solar religion, and they had a shamanic religion. They interweaved them through 5,000 years of time. So you get these different ages of religion that pop up, and then they kind of go out of style, and then they kind of reinvent it, and it comes up through another tradition in another city, in another capital, and those priests are the ones that are kind of like the big mahavs, and they're the ones where everybody is listening to how they're kind of teaching the word. But in essence, especially when we look at the older ones, if we're looking at very, very primal archetypes, and Horus the Elder, the Horus that the Temple of Edfu is dedicated to, is the element of light that overcomes chaos. It's like the old balancing act of yin and yang. You can't have one without the other. And that's kind of that's a very primal principle in Egyptian theology. You must have the balance. You must have the interplay between the two. You can't, because in the beginning there just is the void. There just is darkness. But darkness can't be allowed to exist. It doesn't want to exist, and from the darkness comes the light. That's where we have the myth of Horus, and we have the myth of Atum springing up from nothing. It's a really interesting idea, because when you go way back to it, you could kind of look at their explanation for the Big Bang Theory, quantum physics, cell division, you name it. They have it all encapsulated in some of these mythologies. Horus the Younger, the son of Isis and Osiris, I believe is that more human counterpart. When we think of ourselves as, okay, we're all part of God, but we're human. It's the human part of us is the younger Horus, who goes through all the, adventures as the son of Isis and all of that. That very primal Horus the Elder, he's the aspect of light that's in constant renewal against the darkness. It's very interesting, because that temple holds there's a lot of mysteries in that temple of Edfu. And
Edfu is amazing, and isn't Edfu being the temple of the priests and Dendra being the temple of the priestess. And I hear that you're growing a blue lotus and trying to nurture a blue lotus back. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that in the oil room in Edfu there is pictures on the wall of the blue lotus, like depicted carvings, recipes.
Yes, the blue lotus is everywhere on the carvings in Edfu, and also at Dendera as well, in the perfume rooms there. Midwifing the blue lotus back into Egypt is a project that I took on about 3 years ago, and basically the idea is to have enough blue lotus growing in Luxor so that we can replenish and give them back to the temples. It would be great to go back into Karnak Temple in the Sacred Lake there and see the blue lotus back in its
Wouldn't that be fabulous?
Exactly. The Egyptian Revolution kind of put a damper on some of the original project work that was the beginnings of it. But that's the idea. Some of these things, it's like they're a process. It's like the lotus is holding energy. It's holding a frequency, and these lotuses are basically they feel to me like they're from a whole different planet of species. They don't even come from the earth, really. And that their energy is about renewal, it's about immortality, and it's about pushing the envelope on the human condition. And the medical properties are astounding. So why they are not there, and why they haven't been there for a very, very, very long time. It's the same reason why the Sphinx was buried up to its neck in sand, and a lot of those temples weren't found for hundreds and hundreds of years. When the time is right, the elements for evolution appear, and it is not an easy task to help bring these things forth. It's not. If it was easy, all humans would have been enlightened by now. Obviously, there are some rungs to go through yet, and I think that what we're looking at, if we kind of see the clues, and we really open our eyes, it's like we're on a fast track. We don't have to go through the initiations that took lifetimes before. And I've taken thousands of people to Egypt by now, probably, and everyone has their own personal glitch, or everyone has a past life where maybe they felt like they didn't make it through an initiation, or maybe they had a bad life in this place or that place or whatever. But the idea is now we're kind of moving through that quickly. We don't need to labor under those delusions and fears anymore. That's the fast track to enlightenment, if you will. And the downfall of the fast track is if you make any mistakes, you don't have anyone to blame but yourself. There's no hierophant, there's no high priest, there's no temple dog telling you what to do anymore. You've got to know it, and you've got to trust yourself, and you have to follow your own truth. It's very difficult. The age of Aquarius is not for the faint of heart. It's about knowing who you are, having the courage of your convictions, speaking your truth, and then allowing the other person the same liberties, if you will, spiritual, personal, and physical.
Well, thank you so much, Mary, and I wish we had more time. We could go on for hours.
Exactly.
And I just want to thank you for, imparting your knowledge and your experience and your wonderful pearls of wisdom on Egypt. And we would love to have you back again. Thank you.
Thank you. I know there's a lot more to say.
Hello, my name is Res Miranda. If you're having relationship, career, or life issues, I'm inviting you to experience what it's like to have access to professional, highly accurate psychics and spiritual advisors you can trust to care and help you. Register now to get your free 6-minute reading by telephone or chat. Get answers, get access, psychic access, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. PsychicAccess.com.